Hello, everyone, and welcome to Enterprise Architecture, a key to unlocking the value of acquisitions. My name is Gustav Toppenberg, and with me today I have my good friend and colleague and research fellow, Stefan Henningsson. Let's just jump right into it. We'll do a quick introduction first, and then we'll jump into the material. What you'll see here is the result of several years of both practitioner experience as well as research experience in the focus area of mergers and acquisitions. A little bit of information about me. I have been in the practice field of enterprise architecture and digital transformation in well over 20 years in larger and smaller firms. And myself and Stefan are doing consulting work with Qatar Consortium, and as you can see, as well. So this presentation is in partnership with them, and we appreciate the opportunity to partner with them. With myself as well as Stefan, you can find more information about the research that we've done at the bottom, and also some contact information. Stefan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, indeed. So I'm Stefan Henningsson. I'm a professor at Copenhagen Business Schools in Denmark. So I'm also a senior consultant with Qatar. And my main research area, I would say, is mergers and acquisition, which I've been researching now for more than a decade. And I worked with a bunch of large companies. Some of them would be familiar with you.
Thank you, Stefan. The question we want you to think about in the next 30 or so minutes is your organization. Where is it at? In the digital age and an increasing amount of digitalization across the world, we're seeing it in so many different ways. How can you, as a technology or enterprise architecture leader, help your organizations grow and change and adapt to that change, in particular in the context of mergers and acquisitions, what we've chosen to call acquisitive growth? One of the motivations for participating today is to share some of the insights and findings from the research and from practice as well. We've also captured those in a book that was published earlier on in 2020, and we've called that Architecting Growth in the Digital Era. It has lots of different case studies of companies struggling with, succeeding with, and overcoming some of these challenges, but ultimately seeing some benefits, large and small benefits, from leveraging enterprise architecture in this process of acquisition from end to end. And that's what we want to show you today and share with you today as well. We welcome questions, of course, afterwards on all of the topics that we share today, and we look forward to a lively Q&A.
To put this in a context, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes to sort of unravel the merger and acquisition challenge and what we think about it, just to be able to position EA and what it can actually deliver on here. I mean, we witness in the world that mergers and acquisitions are becoming increasingly popular. Every year there are basically more of them. And there seems to be a embedded part of transforming at the speed of digital. So when the world is moving faster, when competition is moving faster, then instead of focus on internal growth and internal innovation, increasingly companies need to rely on mergers and acquisitions. And you do so to strengthen your competitive power in a range of ways, right? It could be increased scale and scope for your offerings, or to get unique capabilities, to acquire a kick-ass innovation capacity, to get a new business model going, specific tech and talents, or simply buying options for things that might happen in the future. So the whole range of mergers and acquisition, and that is part of what makes them so difficult, because this is not a homogeneous, routinized task you're facing. It's more of a more explorative in the sense that you need to deal with a lot of different challenges going on. But they do have something in common, in particular the larger ones, where there's a lot of processes and people and technologies that needs to come together. And this is the key to many of the acquisitions. And even though they're so important, the mergers and acquisitions are so popular, truth is that most acquisitions fail to create value for the acquirer. Now, on the acquiree side is quite different. I mean, it's tend to be good for shareholders if your company get acquired. But on the acquisition side, the average value creation is around 0, depending on how you run. But there's huge variation within the span. So some doing really well and some doing really poor. But overall, it turns out to be a very complex challenge. And one of the things that makes it so difficult is that there is a very, very short time to bring these two companies together. If you're in this world, you have felt the pressure of time to synergy and time to market to realize the synergies. And the reason is that because you make major investments in acquisition, and if you delay that, I mean, the sort of interest you pay makes it a bad deal, then you can't recover it. So you really need to go to market and realize the synergies, cost synergies, revenue synergies as soon as you possibly can. And that really puts a very high pressure on the integration phase. On the other hand, you can't start before you actually seal the deal. You can't start thinking about an integration project until you actually know what you're going to be acquiring, because many times there are multiple bidders, there are legal reasons why you can't start. So this means that everything is just cramped into this very, very small space where you have to run a whole set of tasks at the same time. So you have high complexity, high time pressure. And of course, because you can't just bring in anyone to do this job, you have to work with a limited set of people. And this sort of makes the equation very difficult. And the fact is that for most firms, it doesn't really add up. There are more work to be done than you can possibly do within this small space. So you go to simplifications, you go for the big target, and then you leave some synergies on the tables. You do quick fixes, but yeah, that works, but installs technical debt that you have to deal with. I mean, missed opportunities, things you see during the process, but you can't really change direction. You can't change the way you communicate to the market and say, okay, we're going to delay 6 months to go for this. And of course, there are delays as you have to push the deadline further on. And the result is that promising deals do not create acquisition value, that long-term performance issues are emerging. And particularly, this is critical if you do a series of these things or other strategic initiatives, that every time you do something, you build in a couple of inefficiencies, and over time, these complexities sort of add up to something where it's very, very hard to move forward. Now, so this is the drama then, and where enterprise architecture really comes into play here is that, well, it allows us to increase the speed by which we execute in the acquisition phase itself. It allows us to deal with more complexity, and thereby we can handle larger tasks within the selection and integration. But it also allows us to push some of this stuff into the preparation side. So things that some companies would do by the time to seal a deal and acquire a company, you can actually put into the preparation side, about building reputation, about connecting networks, about documenting stuff. And you can also move forward so that the inefficiencies, the debt you created because of this frenzy in short time gets documented and also taken care of moving forward, so that the next time you do an acquisition, don't start from the poor state where you left the last one, but actually return to a good position. This is the overall value picture where we think that EA can come in, both to reduce extend the project backwards to sort of start before you know what you're going to acquire, execute faster and better and with higher precision, and leaving less things on the table during the acquisition itself, and moving forward. You can clear the debt so that you don't create issues for you moving forward. So this is an overall picture, and now I'm going to hand over to Gustav to go into a little bit more depth on how EA can actually do so, because it's easy to say, it's easy to sell, but I'm going to leave it for Gustav to explain a little bit on how this is going.
All right, thanks, Stefan. As Stefan mentioned, there are various different ways that EA can help in the life cycle of mergers and acquisitions. First of all, as he just mentioned, In the pre-acquisition preparation phase, ensuring that the company is actually ready to acquire is very, very important, and a way for EA to, with its capabilities, help organizations, help leaders think differently about the types of potential targets, the types of potential growth opportunities or change opportunities that are ahead of them. I'll go through the acquisition process here on the left-hand side and explain a little bit more, and then we'll get over on the right-hand side as well. Going from pre-acquisition preparation to the process of acquisition selection, this is where, depending on the type of EA organization is in your company or the EA organization that you're leading, you may have different ways of impacting this process. In organizations that we've come in contact with, organizations that we've worked with and worked for, we found that certain EA organizations are actually focused very much on the business capability side, and both the business model and the operating model. And therefore, because of the role that they play, can help identify opportunities for acquisition targets and potentially also help identify areas of threats of resources as well, how an organization that comes in and merges with the existing organization, and potentially in certain cases, we've seen companies where multiple acquisitions are all happening at the same time. So don't think of this as a linear process, but think of it as a sort of multiplier effect that happens depending on how inquisitive or acquisitive, I should say, your company is. Going into the acquisition integration stage itself, which is where we see a lot of EA organizations already embedded, either at the business level, the operating level, or the technology level. This is where you can start to diagnose the implementation of this integration mechanism as well. So you can start to plan for, knowing a relatively good version of your current state, you can start to plan for the target state in various different ways. And for all of the enterprise architecture professionals and leaders who are listening to this, you'll know that there are multiple different ways that you can help. What gets missed sometimes is EA's role in the post-integration continuation phase. EA has a really important role, even though it's always thought of as a strategic planning and strategic integration capability. EA leaders and leaders in technology and in business who think like architects also have the ability to, as that acquisition is happening and closing out multiple phases, to do some level of performance assessment and address any inefficiencies or technical debt or non-technical debt created during that integration. Ultimately, the acquisition outcome is, of course, this benefits realization and understanding the organizational performance prior to, during, and after. And again, if you think about that idea that certain companies or some companies are actually doing this multiple times and overlapping as well. There is an iterative nature between all of these different ones as well, and so that's what you see there in the center. On the right-hand side, we wanted to give you an idea of what we see as some of the components of an advanced enterprise architecture capability, realizing that every EA group, every EA leader is in a different space. And so what we'll talk about as well coming up is, depending on where you're at on your journey, there are different ways that you can impact your organization, starting exactly where you're at. But the path to a large degree of maturity is what's depicted here on the right-hand side. So in terms of what we call qualities, being fully engaged, which means that you are partnering with and you are engaging in and you are seen as a leader who's at the table with a voice at the table. That's what engaged means. You know, some organizations will see themselves in different ways, or some groups will see themselves maybe less engaged. And holistic truly means that when we think about enterprise architecture, it is the business models, the ways of going to market, the operating models, all of the different processes and value streams that exist in an organization, and then the data, the application, the infrastructure, all of those different layers, the security layers, is all thought about when you think about an enterprise architecture organization and its responsibilities. And then capacities, of course, technology, process, and people. And then artifacts, solution models, transformation models. This is all the goodness that mature EA organizations have at their disposal, but need to think about in a more consumable way. Think about the decision making that could be made with those solutions rather than just the creation process of them. All right, let's go forward to the next slide. And I'll share a little bit about how to position acquisition through EA. So as we talked about before when we looked at the earlier slide, these acquisition possibilities are identified. Then you start to define the acquisition scope. You're going to figure out how and why and to what degree you're going to acquire this company standalone. Are you going to embed it? Why are you doing that? And EA can help in terms of a lot of different areas, as I mentioned on the earlier slide. Some of the ways we would encourage you to look at, and we've seen in companies, is your infrastructure preparation. And think of infrastructure really holistically as infrastructure. Clearly the legacy technical architecture is a big part of that. So where's your data managed? How is your data managed? Which applications are going to be impacted? Your current true technical infrastructure, your networks and your data warehouses and so forth, does this acquisition challenge or complement your existing plans, and do you potentially need to replan some of those? There are lots of capability documentations that can be used here as well. Depending on where you're at, those capabilities may be more technical or they may be more operational and business aligned as well. There's a lot of different knowledge integration that you can complement this process with as well. And then an important area is identify all of the gaps. As people in organizations, we tend to be at times myopically focused on the area of that company that we're part of. And what enterprise architecture can help with, particularly in a time of transformation, is identifying those gaps that exist in terms of data transaction, in terms of a customer journey or a value stream, or potentially in the security space as well. So there are lots of different ways that you can help from an EA position. Let's jump to the next one, and I'll share a little bit more about this idea of engaged and how EA orchestrates and can orchestrate this strategic transformation. As I mentioned, when we looked at different organizations, different EA groups within organizations, we found that there were sort of 4 different archetypes, and it's on the x-axis, it's split between sort of, is the EA organization focused mostly in the technical domain, or does it also include the organizational domain? And by organizational domain, we mean, again, the business models, the operating models, sort of the front end of the business as well. And then on the y-axis, we talk about a decoupled or truly engaged. By decoupled, we mean that the EA organization may exist, and if it exists, it's a very sort of traditional organization or group that partners with, but is seen separately from a lot of the strategic decisions. But in the engaged model, you see the EA organization sitting very close to, certainly in the technical domain, the CIO, the CTO, or the chief digital officer, or even the chief data officer as well, and is thought of as a thought partner in this process. As we move over to the organizational domain, I mentioned before this idea of this advanced EA capability. That's where it's both advanced and holistic as well. you may find yourself in one part of these four archetypes. And I would encourage you, if you see yourself in one area, first of all, to think about the value that you can add right where you're at this day today. If you're finding yourself in a mode of transformation, and even if it isn't acquisitions, mergers and acquisitions, you likely have some ways of impacting currently. And then deciding what's the next step on your journey. Are you moving perhaps from the technical domain in a very traditional EA organization up towards being more actively engaged? You're going to partner closer with the IT leaders. Are you going to be moving more over to the right potentially, and recognizing that you may not be fully engaged with a voice at the table, but you want to impact more directly the organizational domains as well? Or do you want to be aspirational and move from the traditional to the advanced as well? We've seen organizations or teams that have done that as well, and have found sponsors and leaders who can see the value of enterprise architecture, but need the demonstrated use cases, and that EA organization is given a chance as well. On the right-hand side, this is what we recommend you to do. You understand your current state, likely very well from a technical standpoint, or again from an organizational and technical standpoint. Start to think about, what are the acquisition needs, what are the acquisition drivers, how is that happening, and help to transform that action plan. Maybe even come with some recommendations, even if you aren't asked to participate. Come ready with some recommendations and help build that action plan. Let's jump to the next one. So this is looking at, once you're in this space of the enterprise architect, and you're looking at all of these different capabilities that you have, these artifacts, these capacities that you have, how can you help to connect the dots? Again, either you're invited to participate in an active role, or you may be thinking, hey, there's an architectural match that really nobody is talking about. This is your sweet spot. You can start to look at the organization currently, the acquirer and the acquiree, and you can start to, almost like a reference architecture, you can build out a reference architecture for your company, and start to look at potentially targets and try to understand what's the architectural match or mismatch in all of these different resources. Again, depending on what your purview is, you could start with the technical. The reality is that many organizations miss the value capture because of the technical side. So you already have an incredibly important role to play. So that would be one of our recommendations. That's a relatively straightforward way to start looking at this. Again, if your organization has already acquired, you could go back and look at that point in time of the acquisition, what were the matches and mismatches, and use that as a way to move the conversation forward in terms of your role. All right, let's move to the next one. All right, so we're here. We've shared some different ideas. We've shared some thoughts with you in terms of why mergers and acquisitions are important, why they're difficult, and some of the ways that EA can add value. So if you're with us to this point in time and you are committed to moving forward in one larger or smaller way, these are some ways that we recommend that you start making a case for EA's engagement in acquisitions. Start to understand some of the pain points. As we mentioned before, those pain points may arrive in the match or mismatch of capabilities in identifying targets. Start to understand who owns those problems, and were the problems existing prior to the acquisition, during the acquisition, or post the acquisition as well. And what are some of the value principles of your organization, and how can you start to address the pain points with the problem owners, and really figure out how to drive that value forward in terms of what your organization thinks is important. Once you understand the interplay and interchange between all three of them, then you can look at to what degree is EA mandated to perform, and to what degree is potentially the acquisition team mandated to perform. You can start to build some basic capacities in your organization. You can start to address some of those pain points and start to learn, and then figure out how are those applicable to the acquisitions that are either taking place in partnership with potentially your CIO, your CTO, or your COO or CEO as well, depending on your purview. And then you can start to unlock some of that value that we've talked about being missed many times. That in turn, with your increased participation, will increase the mandate to perform. And we've seen this rotation spin faster and faster when organizational leaders see that you have some real value to impart. One of the things I would encourage you to do as well is not stopping short of just relying on yourself and your team to be thinking about enterprise architecture and architectural thinking, but transfer some of that knowledge onto those leaders so they're always thinking about it, whether or not you're in the room or not. All right, so that's what we had to share with you today. There's a couple of lessons learned that we wanted to ensure that you took away. And some reality checks. Mergers and acquisitions are absolutely key to reaping benefits of transforming digital economies. More and more and increasingly so, we're seeing small and large organizations using this as a capacity and capability to move ahead of many of their competitors. This reactive sort of victim to circumstances approach to mergers and acquisitions value realization leads to not only suboptimal outcomes, but sometimes potentially detrimental outcomes as well. And acquisitions that had really good intent and really good potential value potentially not only captures no value, but actually destroys value as well. So this is where you, as an enterprise architecture leader, as an enterprise architecture team, can come in when you start to help purposefully manage this acquisition process by thinking ahead, by being less reactive and more proactive in your acquisition processes, and then also how you manage the technical and non-technical debt, as well as how you think about the performance as well. So to fully leverage EA, we believe that this holistic and engaged set of qualities are critical. Again, there's a lot more information, and we'll share with you some points of view or some points of reference here. The book, of course, is there as well, and we encourage you to reach out to either of us or both of us, and we can go into a lot more detail on these different areas. The most important thing is all EA capabilities. Again, no matter what role you play, no matter who you are, no matter what your EA organization maturity is, start where you're at today. The capabilities that you have today become the fertile foundation for you to grow your importance and impact on mergers and acquisitions, and they can all be leveraged in some way. Before we wrap up today and do some Q&A, we want to share with you some different ways that EA and that we've helped organizations with as well. So if you're thinking in terms of, hey, where do I take this next? What's an activity that I can start with? IT integration in the readiness assessment, helping to prepare and think proactively about the application landscape. You likely have a lot of that information already. Building potentially an IT integration team. You can start with a virtual team as well if there isn't the organizational appetite yet to create an IT integration team. Engaging enterprise architecture and the orchestration of IT transformation in general. So if that isn't part of what you do currently. Executive coaching, as I mentioned, imparting some level of architectural thinking is important. And then doing industry research and benchmarking. Your participation today is part and parcel of that idea. All right, last but not least, as promised, here are some different ways to take what we've shared today and continue the learning process. We've published a few Cutter articles, of course, as well as all of the other research and insights that we have in general. But here are some of the Cutter articles in the archive. And we also do offer up help, of course, as well through Cutter to help people like yourself. So here's a link if you're interested in that as well. And with that, I want to thank all of you for participating today. I want to thank Stefan as well. for being my co-presenter and for being a great friend and colleague through so many years. Let's transition it over to questions and answers. Thank you again.
Thanks.